Hello. Uh, I'm so sorry that I can't join you there, but uh, we'll do the best we can uh, remotely. So mm, let's see. So I'm going to talk to you today about uh, two examples of policies in the built environment for healthy design. And I'm going to start with the New York City Green Codes Task Force. So in 2008, uh, we, as part of the master plan for sustainability for the city of New York, we wanted to green the city's codes and regulations related to building construction. And so we launched a task force with, I think, 220 people were part of this task force. It's a big city. Uh, uh, Things happen at the large scale. And we wanted to do, a lot of the normal things you would think of with sustainable codes. We wanted to address energy and carbon and water efficiency and things like that. But we wanted to branch out a little bit into some emerging policy areas. One of those was health and toxicity. Another was building resilience, and another was urban ecology. All sort of uh, ahead of the curve, I'd say, for 2008. So it took a year and a half for those uh, policies to be packaged, and then many years later for many of them to be adopted. I'd say of the 110 that were finally proposed, I think 3/4 have ultimately been adopted. So let's focus uh, in on the healthy design piece. Why did we want to add that? Well, um, the data, and Mayor Bloomberg, as you might know, is an extremely data-driven person. And so the data was behind it that something had to be done. You had what's termed here an expanding population with more and more people being overweight. Um, and then chronic diseases had become about 90% of the causes of death in New York City. So there was a reason to address this. And then there had already been a kind of blueprint for ways to address it. Dr. Karen Lee had worked with the Department of Design and Construction and a number of other agencies to put together active design guidelines. And so with that having been done, we felt confident that maybe there were some things that we could promote across the board through changes to the city's codes. So in all, we had 6 proposals for healthy design that we put into the Green Codes Task Force. One was to allow stairway use. We'll talk about what I mean by that a little bit later. We'll get into that. We wanted to promote stair use through signage, encourage stairway use with transparent doors, encourage stairway use by holding doors open, provide zoning bonuses for inviting stairs, and increase the availability of drinking fountains. So those were our 6 proposals. The ones in green are the 3 that I'm going to talk about today. So we wanted to increase the availability of drinking fountains. So New York City's codes already had requirements for drinking fountains in various public spaces. So this was not new. All we wanted to do was to build on that and make it better. One of the big things we wanted to do, since perhaps the AIDS epidemic or even for other reasons, people are not interested in drinking out of drinking fountains. They weren't sure how clean they were. And so they would much rather fill their own bottles at drinking fountains. And uh, this has a lot of benefits in terms of people actually drinking water rather than buying sugary bottled drinks. So we proposed that all new drinking fountains in the city of New York would have to have a, uh, let's see. Here's a summary of the proposal of the actual law. So we required drinking fountains to have a faucet capable of filling high bottles and also a bubbler faucet. And no, the code used to allow bottled water dispensers to be substituted as a required drinking fountain. We said no, that was no longer allowed. So that law got drafted and passed within a year of the release of the Green Codes Task Force. And, I'd say one reason it happened so quickly is that it had clear benefits across several areas. Health was obviously top of mind, reduce weight gain from people drinking sugary drinks, but there were also environmental benefits, less plastic waste for people buying bottled water, reducce transportation for hauling all of those bottles around. And finally, equity, free water coming from a tap where you can fill your own bottle is much more equitable than having people need to purchase bottled water. So the stars were aligned, and I think part of it was, and I think this is a sort of note about trying to move these kinds of ideas in the public policy point of view. It's much easier when everything is in the same direction and there aren't conflicts, but you can gather more people behind the idea because the benefits cross the categories. This is another example where the stars were not as aligned. And this was encourage stairway use by holding doors open. So stairway doors are usually kept closed. They're on, I'm sure you have noticed this, they're these metal doors, and they're kept closed with a closer. And that's because fires want to travel up stairwells, and so does smoke. So you get a chimney effect. And if the doors are open in stairwells, you're going to have fires going from floor to floor and getting out of control. So, however, there is an alternative to this. You could use a magnetic hold open device to hold the doors open, to hold the doors open at times when there's no fire, and then when a fire is sensed, the door would be closed automatically. So that was the proposal, and it took. This one was one of those 5 years later projects that took a long time, negotiating with fire department of the city of New York, who is sort of notoriously cautious for good reason. They're saving people in all these skyscrapers, and their responsibilities are really grave. So we were eventually able to pass this law, but it was a pretty intense negotiation. So you had here some conflicting and some aligned goals. Health, from the point of view of FDNY, at least when we started talking to them, was conflicting with safety concerns, because they were concerned even with the hold opens, what would happen? You might have fires spreading through the stairwells. It turned out that there was an actual safety benefit to having people use stairs and potentially hold opens. And that is that people found, particularly after September 11th and people fleeing from the World Trade Centers, that buildings in which stairs were used more often, people knew where they were. They knew how to get out in case of a fire. So some conflicting and some aligned goals, but from FDNY's point of view, the conflicts really had to be solved in hammering out the actual code language. So I'm just going to walk through this in summary. Oh, and by the way, in case it isn't obvious, the reason hold opens are a very good idea is that if the doors open and you can see the stair, it's really different than a stair that's behind a door hidden away. So a hold open makes a stair much more visible and inviting. So that's the reason we wanted to pass this. And but it could be done, but there were all of these rules. It couldn't contain a high hazard function. It could not be a high rise, or it had to have a fire alarm system and sprinklers, or it could be a high-rise office building with a fire alarm and subdivided into compartments. So a lot of very specific requirements, like it couldn't obviously be a high-rise residential in this, only a high-rise office building. Or it could be if it had sprinklers. And one of the big points that eventually satisfied the fire department was that no more than 3 levels within such vertical exit enclosure could be served by doors of this sort. All levels would have at least another exit. Connected to fire alarm systems. Doors had to be capable of manual release at a fire command center or alarm panel, or by pulling the door. So a lot of requirements were added so that everybody would be comfortable that this was not going to be a health and safety issue. So I just offer this as an example of the kind of details one needs to get into in order to pass codes that are going to satisfy all the groups that need to be satisfied. So finally, I'm going to talk about a last one, allow stairway use. So in New York City, a lot of stairways are locked. At least to, you can't, how does it work? You could flee. So there are typically 2 means of egress stairs in every building. And you can get into that means of egress stair, let's say on the 3rd or 4th floor, and go running down to the 1st floor and get out. That's because it's a means of egress stair and it lets you out of the building. But you couldn't enter that stair many times. You can't enter that stair many times on the 1st floor and get out on the 3rd floor, or you can't enter it on the 3rd floor and get out on the 2nd floor. So in other words, you're not really allowed to use the stairs unless you were simply using them to flee the building and get to the 1st floor. So this obviously wasn't going to encourage stairway use in everyday moving around a building. So we said, look, uh, we worked with the Department of Buildings and we said, okay, let's require all new buildings to have two means of egress stairs. Well, there already are two means of egress stairs. So make one of those, quote, a public access stair. So we came up with this definition of a public access stair, which it must be at least as accessible as the elevator and must have glass windows in the doorways. So what do we mean by at least as accessible as the elevator? Well, some elevators, you just go to them, press the button and go up to the floor you want to go to. We felt that why can't stairs have at least that accessibility? Some of them might be keyed, however, or you might have a special card that gets you to the floor. If you have a building that's keyed or has special cards or other security, then the stairway could be made as secure as the elevator. So saying the building all along has had a certain level of security through the elevator, stairs do not need to achieve a higher level of security. They just need to match that. And they have to have glass windows in the doorways because if you can't see into the stair, it can be a real impediment to actually going into the stair. This, we were so proud of this proposal. We thought we really hit the nail on the head, but it took a long time to hammer this one out. And unfortunately, the Bloomberg administration ended before we were able to get a law passed. So such is the way of policies. Not all of the ones work, even when you get them well-defined and ready to go. So I'm going to do another example. This is less at the codes and standards level, but it's very, very large scale. It relates to the Singapore Housing and Development Board. Roughly 80% of all people in Singapore live in public housing developed by this board. So whatever they do might as well be a code because it's going to impact just about everyone. It just has huge impact. So just to give an idea of the significance of the redevelopment of Singapore, on the left you see an image of Singapore in the 40s or 50s, very old-fashioned slum, not that healthy conditions they were living under. And then to the right, modern Singapore with high-rise towers, elevated trams or subways, elevated trains, I mean, and garden areas, canals, greenery, and so forth. So this has been this radical transformation. And I'm just going to talk about some of the ways that the Singapore Housing and Development Board has promoted health along with other goals all at the same time. And I think that's one reason why they've been successful. I think also the fact that they're a development board and they're not creating codes one by one, they can look more holistically across different goals and try to achieve them through their designs. So I would say that Singapore is really, really a model of integration. You have interdisciplinary strategies that span green design, community, and activity. And we've all learned how important community is for health, good health benefits. And you'll see in many of the examples that I show that building community is a piece of this sort of generally a part of the strategies that are that are being pursued. And then it's multiple scales at the city, neighborhood, or town level, and at the building level. And then they're always researching. When I was in the mayor's office, you didn't see too many countries coming by, a few from time to time, but you always saw Singapore coming by to hear what we were doing about water, about this, about that. So they're very much eager to learn, and I think that shows in what you'll see. So you have, here's one of the projects that I would say is town scale integration. So there's the Pungo Waterway, and you can see it's a place where people are kayaking, people are bicycling next to it. You have greenery to the side, nature, and then you have community, of the various people kayaking together, the various people in these pavilions to the left. So it's really capturing all the pieces of healthy and active design, or many of the pieces in one place. Similarly, this is the town center at Pungal. Pungal is sort of the leading sustainable new neighborhood. And you have, this is a town square. So it brings together people for a lot of different reasons, for public events, but also for activities. So here, a bunch of people from Singapore, from Pungal, are out exercising in the morning. Neighborhood integration. So neighborhoods have to have playgrounds. They have to have community gardens. These are required. So that obviously brings together community, activity, nature, and healthy foods, because people are growing the foods that they're going to be eating. So, another one of these cross-disciplinary, multiple benefit types of policies. Active transportation is something that's encouraged in these developments. And you can see here, you have activity plus nature and sustainability. Obviously, when you have active transportation, people aren't driving cars and burning a lot of gas. Excuse me. More active transportation, so along walkways between buildings. It's obviously a very warm climate, so people are able to walk outside, and they create things called social linkways, where as people are walking around, they meet other people. So they're walking, there's activity and community all in the same places. So finally, I'm going to talk about the last thing are green roofs and walls. Singapore is pretty famous for this. Green roofs and walls have a number of benefits. They cool the buildings, they cool the city as a whole, and they reduce energy consumption because they provide a kind of natural air conditioning. So they work at the level of both providing nature and access to nature in a very crowded city, and also being a sustainable practice. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass it on to the next